This story follows a man who gets transported into a game he was playing, where he is reincarnated into a god named Nebula, and he has to battle 27 other gods to become the sole ruler of the planet and reshape it according to their vision. Part of their challenge is to find and influence a suitable tribe. And luckily for Nebula, he found an extraordinary lizard man named Rockrak, who had been exposed to too many things ever since he was young to turn down an adventure. Rockrak had lost both his parents when he was a child, so he had to grow up without anyone's help, and he had also fought a saber-toothed tiger to protect his tribe at the time when they had gotten kicked out into the wilderness. This caught Nebula's eyes, and so Nebula was convinced that Rockrak had the qualities to be a tribal chief, which also led to Rockrak becoming a high priest that acted on behalf of God's wills. And not too long ago, with the help of God, Rockrak defeated the violent Lizardman tribal chief Boar, and flipped Boar's drake with one hand, and also defeated an ancient Coleoptero when they crossed the wilderness once again. After that, he saw through the deceits of the Frogman tribe that he met for the first time in his life, and witnessed the guardian he believed in cut the inferior fiend the Frogmen worshipped into pieces. These experiences filled Rockrak's life with thrill and adventure. As a result, he no longer viewed new adventures as perilous, but rather as opportunities for transformative change. This mindset led him to eagerly investigate a mysterious cave rumored to have a hidden entrance to an unexplored territory. Now on to the next part. The inside of the ancient ruin was a shockingly large empty space. It was roughly hundreds of meters in diameter, and there was green luminous moss here and there, which made it possible to see the overall size of the clearing. In the center of the empty space were arched stone bridges that were around tens of meters tall, and they were placed in a zigzag pattern that led downward, and seeing that there is no other way around, they will have to go on that path where the stones are laid, which led Rockrak to think that it would be nice if they could jump down at once, as it was such a time-consuming journey, since the stairs seemed to be endless after all. With this, Rockrak stood at the edge and think hard for an easier way to descend, but nothing comes into mind, so Jol then inquired if he is going to pray to their god, to which Rockrak firmly responded that he wouldn't, as he didn't want to trouble their god with such matters. He believed that with their combined presence, they could more easily devise a solution. With this determination, they gathered to brainstorm a plan. They initially considered the idea of weaving long vines into ropes was the most reasonable solution, but considering the time it would take, they decided it would be better to go down the bridge instead. Still, they spent a few more minutes trying to think of something else, but as no great ideas came to them, Rockrak, who valued efficiency in decision-making, ended the meeting, and so they moved on to the next task, and that is to begin descending the bridges with their strong lizardmen legs. However, difficulties emerged not long after they got onto the bridges. Several pairs of glowing eyes were fixed on them, as if these monsters were looking at them like a snack, which intrigued the crew on what danger it might be, and as the eyes drew closer, they revealed their source to be a group of rats, notably large ones at that. But Owen, who had lived in the area for a long time, wasn't a stranger to these creatures, and so he informed everyone on what it's supposed to be, describing it as a nutria, and they may have eaten it a few times before, and with this, they remembered exactly what it was, so now they don't have to wonder if it was a threat. But this one looks a lot bigger than the ones they ate, so there's still a mystery within these creatures. Because an average nutria was about 60 centimeters long and weighed around 10 kilograms, but the nutria Rockrak was looking at seemed to be about a meter long, which meant it would weigh tens of kilograms. Additionally, there was something else that piqued Ratchratch's attention. Now he gets why he didn't think of nutrias when he first saw these creatures, and that is because nutrias don't travel in groups or charge at people while baring their front teeth like that. So there is that possibility that these aren't the nutrias they knew of. With this, Ratchratch decided to just call them rat monsters. It was a simple yet fitting name, because in Ratchratch's opinion, normal animals wouldn't get hostile towards people for no reason. In fact, they would usually run away, but monsters on the other hand ran towards people as if they had a purpose. They might be the ones protecting this place, or maybe they're just rats. But regardless of their nature, the safety of his group was paramount. Therefore, he signaled to everyone to ready their weapons, preparing for any potential threat these creatures might pose. And without even a moment's breath, the rat monsters lunged toward Ratch and the others, but it quickly came to an end. There was around 20 rat monsters, which was quite a lot, but Ratch and his warriors were veterans. While the bridge was quite narrow for all 7 lizard men to stand on at once, the rat monsters charging at them ended up skewered by the warriors' spears. After that, Ratch questioned whether the rats they found could be eaten, which Jarl believed there was no apparent reason why they couldn't be eaten. But she was curious about Ratchatch's tendency to classify everything as either edible or inedible. And Ratchatch quickly justified his approach, stating that determining what is edible is a matter of utmost importance. Jarl agreed that his perspective wasn't wrong, but she proposed an alternative viewpoint. She suggested they could also consider whether the rats could be domesticated and raised similarly to the water buffaloes. This immediately intrigued Ratchatch as expected of his wife, but their journey on this unknown area had just begun, so they will have to put that question for later. So they decided to just remove the organs first in order to easily carry the rats and move along. And while they quickly took the organs out, Owen curiously asked Ratchatch and Jarl on what do they mean by raising these rats. And Ratchatch was about to answer when he realized he didn't know what it meant himself. As the water buffaloes were raised for food, but that wasn't the case with the Drake Manoon. They weren't going to eat Manoon. So he contemplated the concept of raising animals as akin to having slaves. But slaves were dissatisfied with their status, while things that were raised seemed somewhat satisfied. Slaves would also receive backlash for doing as they wished. So they had to suppress those feelings. But that didn't seem to apply to things that were raised. And with this, he was conflicted on what to say. And so he just answered Owen that he's not sure. But still his intelligent wife might have one. So Ratchatch looked at Jarl expecting her to answer instead. But Jarl also seemed troubled by the question. And so, Jarl also gave up on giving a proper answer. And just explained to Owen that it hasn't been long since they've raised something. So they don't know much about it. They're currently raising water buffaloes in Manon. They gain meat from the buffaloes and strength from Manon. And in exchange, they find plants for the buffaloes and give Manon food. They wish for these relationships to last long. This is the only answer she can give him about what it means to raise something. And Owen thought that was a good enough answer. And so he decided to share to them what he had in mind. And that it might be possible to raise fishes. But Ratchatch, being his primitive ass, just think it would be impossible. Since he thinks fish just come and go. But this wasn't Ratchatch's fault. As in the swamps and ponds Ratchatch used to live around, the fish would gradually decrease as they got eaten and eventually disappeared. However, Owen, who used to live with the aquatic frogman, knew that wasn't the case in bigger ponds. And so Owen could enlighten Ratchatch that fish also lay eggs and give birth to young. This was proven by him to be true, as the frogman would warn them against catching fish when it was breeding season. And with this, Ratchatch was extra intrigued. So he immediately asked Owen how could they raise these said fish. And so Owen did just that. Explaining to him that there are fish that grow big, which are easier to catch and eat. But they are also easily eaten by other fish when they are young. So it would be nice if they just stack rocks or wood to make a dike to prevent the younger fish from getting eaten. Which Ratchatch thought it would be difficult to do such a thing in a huge and deep lake. But he didn't say it out loud as he considered it a unique and good idea regardless of it being difficult in reality. And he is thinking of dividing the clan into two. So it'll be cruel to those who have to leave and also to those who have to stay through the winter. So it would be nice to find a way to do what Owen had just suggested. But then all of a sudden, one of the warriors handling a rat monster screamed. And Ratchatch quickly turned around and approached the warrior and looked at the warrior closely. The warrior held his hand in pain. One of his fingers smelled slightly burnt. But it doesn't seem like he got bitten though. So Ratchatch asked the warrior what happened. To which the warrior explained that all he did was touch the rat and he felt pain. This instantly piqued Ratchatch's interest. And so he went ahead and reached toward the rat monster. And as his finger came close to the rat, a bright spark suddenly climbs up to Ratchatch's hand. But he wasn't a stranger to this kind of thing. As Ratchatch knew the concept of static electricity from when he touched fur leather in winter. But this was too painful to be compared to that. And looking at him in pain, his wife Jal immediately went to him with concern in her eyes as this was also a shock to her. As she doesn't have a clue on what is going on. And only Nebula, who was watching everything unfold from behind, realized what it was. The Nutria was possessed by the demonic energy of the ruin that he hoped it would not be. And this was because divinity wasn't the only source of power in the Lost World. For example, the last time Nebula had won the game on Earth, he used nuclear weapons, which was technology rather than divinity. Divinity and science would grow directly proportional to each other until the Middle Ages. And in modern times, they became negatively correlated. When people become faithful to their gods, they tend to distort science. On the other hand, when people become proficient with scientific technology and knowledge, they believe in godless. This was because science could do what the gods could do. But this decrease in belief was still less than in the real-world Earth. There's no way to really know if gods exist on Earth. But gods are real in the lost world. And in the lost world, alongside divinity and science was magic. Magic was also negatively correlated with divinity. But it was different from science in that the negative correlation between magic and divinity existed from the very start. This is because magic is its own force. Anyone or anything that used powerful magic in ancient times was unstoppable. Those who had magic would be perceived as a god, and thus they wouldn't believe in a god. Magical powers naturally began to weaken and fall during modern times as science developed. But not every game progresses until modern times. And he had also secured quite a few wins with magic. Therefore, he knows too well that it was important for players of the Lost World to not only utilize divinity, but also balance science and magic well. Nebula had a good understanding of these rules, and always thought of using magic if necessary. But he didn't think he would obtain demonic magic this quickly. And among the many kinds of ancient ruins were the demonic ruins, which were considered an ultimate dungeon to obtain demonic magic. Simply put, acquiring demonic magic would grant the individual the ability to learn magic. Additionally, the effect not only applies to the individual making the achievement, but also to a few generations of their close kins, especially if it's a clan society like Rakrak's clan. All members of the clan may obtain demonic magic. That was the dangerous part. Obtaining demonic magic did not mean one would become a wizard right away. In order to use magic, spells needed to be learned, and these types of spells required research on ancient ruins. All kinds of ancient knowledge and magic. However, those who had demonic magic were powerful just by having it. They could make small flames, make objects shine, or even make sparks fly. And this ancient ruin will give electrical demonic magic, as it was described in the system window Nebula was looking at. Electricity is always useful. It's on the better side of demonic magic. But the problem was that if demonic magic was obtained, there would be penalties in obtaining faith points. Rakrak was likely to be the one to conquer the ancient ruin, so there was no question that Rakrak would receive the demonic magic. In addition to that, it was possible that the 350 Lizardmen related to Rakrak within his clan would also receive the demonic magic, and 3 out of the 350 would get it for sure. And they'll just think it's some kind of mysterious power. It'll even seem fancy since it's electrical demonic magic. However, Nebula knew what would happen afterwards. Making use of the magical ruins was a common mistake among the beginners of the Lost World. Beginners would become obsessed with the fact that they could obtain magic and lead their tribes to demonic ruins just to make them obtain demonic magic. They would also then focus their resources on those who had the demonic magic and increase their XP. The cultivated individuals would pass on their demonic magic to their descendants, and the demonic magic would become stronger and stronger over the generations until finally, a wizard emerged. A wizard is one of the best classes from the beginning to the middle stages of the game. Wizards had strong powers that no individual could handle. The stronger they became, the greater the number of enemies they could deal with at once, which would lead to them gaining the authority to create aristocracy. Above all, because the source of the wizard's powers were magic rather than a god-given gift, they would not rely on a god. And in the Lost World, demonic magic stemmed from an ancient evil called red herring. That's why divinity and demonic magic come into conflict. Once wizards became that powerful, even the players would not be able to do anything to control them. Therefore, the players would invest in witch hunting or taboo to decrease the influence of demonic magic as a result. Still, it is possible to control the power somehow, but in the process, too much time and resources would be wasted. Such power might be a perk in the beginning, but that all becomes meaningless if resources are wasted on unnecessary things by the middle of the game. And a player such as Nebula would be able to balance magic well, allowing him to apply it to his build with no other problems. But it was tiring to do so, and determining whether to increase or decrease unnecessary variables was also an important task in the game. According to the statistical side of things, demonic magic did have a lower win rate due to beginners getting overthrown by wizards, but it was still on the higher side of things when compared to pure divinity or deity-demon blend. But he does aim to play with more variability, so he was contemplating if he should warn Rakrak that the demonic ruin will start to show its true colors and try to tempt them. Even with Rakrak's personality, he would go to the ends of the ancient ruin if he doesn't warn him. And so Nebula agonized whether to warn Rakrak, but then decided not to. This was because once he checked Rakrak's stats again, he discovered a unique ability that hadn't been there until recently. It was likely to have appeared as Rakrak defeated Xiaonan and Aloy's frogmen. With this, Nebula was convinced that it might be fine to just leave it to Rakrak, as he believes that Rakrak will get the best outcome, since there is a way to acquire both divinity and demonic magic without getting penalties after all. And so Nebula just waited and see what will happen. Meanwhile, back to Rakrak's side of things, amid the sharp pain that Rakrak was experiencing, Rakrak suddenly heard a voice speak to him, asking him if he wants this kind of power, which made Rakrak look around, but saw nothing unordinary. So his attention went to Jael, who was frantically asking if he was okay, to which Rakrak replied that he was, but seeing what happened to him, they should make sure to kill these rat monsters. So those who know how to shoot arrows, he asked them to ready their bows, and those who were injured should watch the rear. But as he was instructing them, Rakrak then heard the voice again, asking him again if he was interested in the power displayed. Rakrak only moved his eyes this time and saw a wide, transparent creature crackling with blue sparks hovering in the air. Its outer appearance was that of a stingray, but Rakrak, who had never seen a stingray before, didn't know what it was. And as he was wondering what to say to it, the electric stingray then told Rakrak that it can hear him even if he speaks with his mind. This fascinated Rakrak. So he did just that, promptly asking the stingray what it was, to which it confidently responded that he is the spirit that protects this ruin, and he is only visible to those with strong powers. But Rakrak thought that the stingray said was a lie, but as he thought of this, he realized this thought wasn't communicated to the spirit. Consequently, he realized that shallow thoughts are communicated, but deeper thoughts aren't. So if the stingray really is a spirit that can distinguish those with strong powers, he can try to read this thought too. But as he expected, the electric stingray wasn't able to read this thought. With this in mind, Rakrak was more confident in conversing with this unknown entity. So he then asked the stingray, what power is it talking about, which the stingray proudly responded that he is talking about electricity, the power to burn other beings and create light, sunlight light and fire like heat, and it can give him that power. And Rakrak nodded in a subtle way that would not seem strange to the others that were with him, and responded that he will gladly accept it if it gives it to him. But the electric stingray hesitated, revealing that there was one more condition Rakrak had to meet before receiving the promised power. This revelation caused Rakrak to frown. As expected, this stingray was a scammer. It is not here to give, but to trade. And so, with a cold tone in his thoughts, Rakrak schooled the stingray that if it was really initiating a trade in the first place, it has to state the conditions first. And it needs to make sure to convey what it is giving him and what it is that it wants from him. But because of what it just did, Rakrak expressed that he was disappointed and felt a lack of trust and straightforwardness in their dealings. So he might not be willing to accept his offer anymore. Still, the stingray tried to convince Rakrak that meeting the condition would be easy for his strength, but Rakrak had enough of its bullshit. So he looked at the stingray with the most devious side eye and commanded to not lie no more. And he doubles down with a warning that if he felt even an ounce of lie on the words it was about to say, he would just go back right now and block the entrance to this cave that seemed to have been blocked for no apparent reason. Then he could order his warriors to prevent anyone from entering this cave and warn all the descendants of his tribe to never enter. So if there is really something it wants from him, it should know its place and show the appropriate attitude. And with this, the electric stingray was clearly in a state of panic. And this was such a turn of events. Because in Nebula's knowledge, the intelligence of spirits wasn't that high. However, it wasn't easy for individuals who entered a demonic ruin to resist the temptation of the spirits. As expected, this was Rakrak's new ability in play, as he could now detect bullshit even from miles away, and this skill proved advantageous in negotiations, allowing him to gain the upper hand by identifying and leveraging any untruths or exaggerations presented by others. With Rakrak's threats loud and clear, the stingray bowed its head and apologized. In response, Rakrak told the stingray there was no need for apologies. To remember this lesson for the future. With this, the electric stingray flew closer to Rakrak, but its fluttering seemed less powerful than before, and then told Rakrak the truth that it is actually sealed within this ruin. It can fly freely within this space, but is unable to leave. It wishes to be freed from this restraint, offering the power of electricity to whoever could liberate it. And Rakrak, understanding the situation, promptly inquired about what needed to be done for its release, to which the electric stingray explained that it was quite straightforward, actually. It goes down there and kill the one guarding its seal. It will become free, and so it can give him the power. This caught the interest of Rakrak, so he followed up asking if that means he would be able to do the zap thing that the rat monster did, to which the electric stingray enthusiastically confirmed. However, it clarified that he couldn't suddenly gain what the rats could do, as he still need to train the power by continuously using it. And then it becomes stronger, and the power it has is very strong, so it won't only go to him. In himself, a few others within his clan will get the power, too, and its power can be passed down to his descendants. The progress and power he has made won't be directly passed down, but should his descendants continue to train their power like he does, some of those who share his blood may become stronger than him. This instantly amazed Rakrak. This prompted for Rakrak to willfully express his true thoughts, and asked about the elephant in the room. Asking the stingray the exact reason it is trapped here, but just like before it hesitated and stuttered as it answered Rakrak's question, explaining to him that it was because its power is too strong. People stay away from dangerous things like poison or monsters, and if they can't stay away from it, they trap it and put it away. With this, Rakrak's face hardened, and pointed out that it just admitted that its whole being is dangerous. This only gave Rakrak more of a reason to keep it contained, but he knew this wasn't the case, as he felt that this stingray is just stupid, so it just made an error while it actually attempted to hide something again. So the harm is greater than the benefits of having that power, and the stingray was about to defend his case and try to lie its way out of the situation. But it remembered what Rakrak had just said, and so it immediately stopped itself from saying anything rash, and seeing that the electric stingray be mindful and respected his wishes. Rakrak decided to release the tension within them by admitting to the stingray that he still wants to have that power. So they should just start the deal from the top and call the stingray's app, but this only confused it, so Rakrak clarified to it that he decided that will be its name from now on, to which the stingray tried to correct Rakrak that it is not named Zap though. In response, Rakrak explained that this was the start of his deal with him choosing its name as it tried to trick him. So the conditions have to be more favorable to him. Zap became sullen, and just responded with a soft okay, and it then inquired about his other conditions, which Rakrak answered as though it was self-evident. Racking Zap to clarify why it is considered dangerous, as Rakrak held the belief that if Zap truly possessed power worthy of a deal, there would be no need to conceal its dangerous aspects. Conversely, if there were reasons to hide its perilous nature, then it wouldn't be worth entering into a deal, for Zap hovered in the air. Think for a little bit, and understood Rakrak's reasoning, so it then confirmed to Rakrak that its own power is worth taking a risk for. This is what Rakrak had wanted, so he asks what kind of risk it was talking about, prompting Zap to explain further, stating that it originated from an ancient evil, the ones who ruled over this world a long, long time ago, but it was so long ago that their existence was forgotten, and even the gods don't remember them either. Because of it, itself also can't recall its origin. One day it just found itself trapped here, and Rakrak understood Zap's feelings quite well, as he also grew up as an orphan. So he tells Zap that there's no need to know who it were born to be. What's more important is deciding what it'll do about the days ahead of it. Zap was a bit thrown off that it got comforted by Rakrak's words, but soon continued. Zap explains that a power of unknown origin is intoxicating to people because the source is unknown. This allows one to believe that the power belongs to them when in reality, they just happen to get it by chance. Once they start using such a power, they start to believe they deserve it, and once they start to think that way, they look down on the ones without power. Rakrak found it a bit difficult to understand, but nodded, remembering Bor's and Skunen's emotions. And so it seems like the demonic magic also makes people become like that, which Zap confirmed, as its power spreads indiscriminately. Consequently, Rakrak tried to predict what would happen if he obtained this power. As this electrical demonic power seems different from something a god would give, God's power is only given to those God chose and at God's discretion. On the other hand, if someone is given a power like this without being deserving of it, others would become jealous and envious, and if that power grows greater and greater, there would be people who scorn God. And Rakrak then understood the reason why Zap was dangerous. This led him to ask Zap why should he take such a risk to have its power, which it immediately responded that it's because its power is strong. Still, it's also destructive. And as Rakrak was heavily thinking of what to do, Zap then demonstrated his power. With this, Rakrak immediately thought he had seen this kind of light from somewhere, and eventually realized what it was. It was like thunder and lightning. Rakrak assumed that the strength of the power determined the intensity of the light it produced. It could be just a small spark at first, but once the power grew and became stronger, it could become thunder and lightning. Rakrak also understood that it would be advantageous in battle if he could produce electricity from his body like the monster rats did. And so Rakrak admitted to Zap that it's indeed an appealing power, which made Zap delighted, promptly asking Rakrak if he made up his mind and set it free, to which Rakrak confirmed, but before that he has a condition that the stingray should fulfill. This intrigued Zap, so it flew towards Rakrak as if it expected Rakrak to say so and continued to talk, as it assumed that Rakrak wants to have the power for himself, which it won't judge as it was understandable for an individual to monopolize such power, but the process will probably be difficult. But it's possible there are a few things he will need though. In order for one person to have its power, a ritual of the same level as the magic will need to be prepared. However, before Zap could continue further, Rakrak shook his head to convey that what it assumed was incorrect. He doesn't have any intention of keeping the power only to himself. Zap was taken aback and somewhat puzzled by Rakrak's line of reasoning, leading it to request further clarification. Rakrak highlighted that Zap had initially mentioned the power of electric demonic magic was distributed indiscriminately, but also noted the possibility of concentrating this power in one individual through a ritual. Rakrak reasoned that if both statements were true, it might also be feasible to selectively distribute this power to specific chosen individuals rather than indiscriminately. Zap, still appearing puzzled, conceded that it hadn't experimented with this approach, but believed it could be possible. A minor ritual might suffice. Although Zap was uncertain why Rakrak would want to do this, Zap reasoned that unless Rakrak monopolized all the power for himself, the outcome would essentially be akin to leaving it to chance. Rakrak, however, disagreed, asserting that the situation would indeed be different. If the power were bestowed only upon certain individuals, it would appear as though it was a deliberate choice made by a god. In other words, the power would no longer seem like an ambiguous force from an ancient evil with no identifiable origin, but would instead be recognized as a power with a clear source and purpose. But Zap just then pointed out that it's not God's choice though. This power isn't granted by a god, but Rakrak just slightly smiled and told Zap that's not the important part. If people think it's God's gift, then it will be from that point on. What difference does that make? The chosen ones will think that God has given them the powers, and their faith and devotion will reach God. And Zap tried to argue against Rakrak, but couldn't think of anything to say. Because what Rakrak was saying was also true of the system of the lost world. If those who had demonic magic believed it was given to them by chance, there would be penalties and gaining faith points. On the contrary, however, if those who had demonic magic mistook it as a power given to them by a god, it would actually result in more faith points. And seeing that Zap was on the same page as him, Rakrak went ahead and told his second condition, surprising Zap as there were more. And so Zap immediately pointed to Rakrak that if he includes himself naming it however he wishes, this next one would actually be the third condition. But Rakrak didn't care about the numbering, as he just casually continued to his third condition. And seeing how determined Rakrak was, Zap just let him do what he pleases. In response, Rakrak cast his gaze towards Zap and told it that it needs to believe in God as well. This shocked Zap beyond belief, but before it could respond, Rakrak clarified that not just any god, it should trust and believe in their nameless beetle god. But as expected, Zap flashed in refusal. The other conditions are fine, but that will be hard for Zap, since it is a spirit of demonic magic. It was created from an existence that has been around longer than gods. Rakrak lightly hit his tail on the ground. The group who was with Rakrak noticed his discomfort and checked up on him. And Joel asked if there was something wrong and if the pain in his hand was okay. And Rakrak simply said he was fine. Rakrak then focused on Zap and asserted that its origins, the hows and whys of its birth, were irrelevant. What mattered was its intentions and actions moving forward. Rakrak then questioned Zap on why it desired freedom. Zap replied with a straightforward reason. It was inherent to its nature. As a spirit of demonic magic, its primary goal was to disseminate demonic magic as widely as possible among various beings. This was the fundamental purpose of its existence. In response, Rakrak admits that Zap seemed useful enough to him. And their nameless beetle god happens to be generous towards useful beings. So it was possible that their god may listen to and fulfill Zap's desires. And the reason why it was made is not important, as they believe that the reason for one's own existence is determined by themselves, not by the one who created them. Zap then steadily slowed its fluttering and told Rakrak that what he wants is impossible since gods do not like spirits of demonic magic. But Rakrak, who has an unwavering conviction, countered that Zap shouldn't judge their god through the lens it looks at the world with. And seeing the stern look on Rakrak's face, Zap inquired whether Rakrak's god would truly accept a being like itself, which Rakrak confirmed, provided that it accepts all the conditions he offered. And he reassured Zap not to worry. He may not know all of God's wishes, but he is the one who understands his wishes best among everyone who knows of him. And with this hidden ability of Rakrak, exuding infinite charisma through his eyes and voice ultimately swayed Zap's decision. Consequently, Zap chose to confess that it had actually lied to him about a few things. Zap revealed that it is not just simply trapped in this ancient ruin. It is true that a challenger of the ruin must defeat the ruin's guard, but that guard is under its rule. It controls everything in this ruin. Furthermore, Zap admitted to sending the demonic magic enchanted nutrients to them Lizardmen, which Rakrak feigned surprise at this revelation, but in truth he was not taken aback. And he also understood the reason why Zap told him that he needed to defeat the guard, and that is because the power shouldn't be given to those who were weak, since they wouldn't be able to widely spread Zap's powers. And Zap confirmed this reasoning. And recently, the Frogman tribe had also come to attempt the challenge. However, they didn't deserve it, which Rakrak thought that was obvious. Meanwhile, Zap was surprised that Rakrak was taking it well rather than before. And therefore, Zap quickly pointed out to Rakrak that it had deceived him and questioned why he wasn't more upset by this revelation. And Rakrak simply shook his head in response, as he had already anticipated the deception, and he was not the type of Lizardman to become upset just because he was deceived without even losing anything. And he can always forgive when he wishes to, even though forgiveness isn't a virtue of a warrior, but he is also the tribal chief. And forgiveness and reconciliation are indeed virtues of a tribal chief. This surprised Zap, and now it found itself viewing Rakrak in a new light, but even before Zap could react further, Rakrak expressed that he understands where Zap is coming from. Not as a warrior, tribal chief, or high priest, but as a Lizardman and as an individual. Getting twisted isn't strange after living in a wet, dark place like this. Always looking at monster rats, so it seems like it could use some fresh air outside and look at beautiful things. Zap immediately flashed with excitement, and Rakrak stopped walking and watched it. Then Zap inquired about his name, which Rakrak promptly responded, and with that, Zap addressed him by his name, and declared that the test is over. It will accept all the conditions he have offered, which made Rakrak delighted. At the same time, at Nebula's side of things, a system interface popped up, notifying him of a demonic magic spirit wishes to be subjugated to him. If he accept, he will receive demonic magic area, electricity, which Nebula immediately clicked yes. And now it was done. Nebula felt a sense of satisfaction. This outcome was the best possible scenario he had hoped for. The key to circumventing the penalties associated with demonic magic lay in transferring it to the divinity area. Without this transfer, each individual imbued with demonic magic would be labeled as demonic magic enchanted and become uncontrollable. However, once demonic magic was housed within the divinity area, it could be managed and controlled effectively. This strategic move ensured a balanced and maintainable use of this potent power, and just as Zap accepted Rakrak's conditions, it became feasible to bestow demonic magic upon select individuals. However, transferring this power to the divinity area did not transform it into divinity, nor could it be leveled up like other abilities in the divinity area. There were specific limitations to its use. Nonetheless, the absence of penalties was a victory in itself, and if breaking through the ancient ruin was all that was needed to be done to obtain demonic power, that would be more than worth it. Rakrak's group would win even if hundreds of those monster rats came attacking them. And if needed, Nebula could always support them by using faith points. However, subjugating a spirit of demonic magic was much more difficult to do. Nebula didn't even know if it would be possible. The only way to find out was to wait and see what would happen depending on each character's abilities, and Nebula seemed to have gotten lucky again and succeeded in doing so. However, Nebula didn't think this was mere coincidence. Meeting Rakrak seems to have been good luck for the both of them, suggesting a significant and potentially beneficial connection between them. After that, several days had passed. There were two figures standing at the top of a hill. Among the pair was a lizard man, proudly telling the story about how the blue insect god gave Rakrak the power of thunder and lightning. And this is the end of the story of how the Chosen Ones came to be among their black-scaled lizardman tribe. And that was 9 years ago. The lizardman told this as they were in front of a tower made from tombstones and water buffalo bones, stacked and assembled with plaster to build a structure tall enough to be seen from far away in the wilderness. This bone tower was built on top of the old one that Rakarak had first created, and was not only used as a way to show faith in the blue insect god, but also used as a milestone now. Finishing telling the long story, the black-scaled lizard man gently dusted one of the stone monuments. This lizard man wore expensive layers of a fabric called silk, which indicated he belonged to a high social class. But the man, on the other hand, looked shabby. On his head was a questionable piece of leather that didn't seem properly tanned, and he had a bushy beard. Still, the man was quite friendly with the lizard man and thinks what he just told was an interesting story. But there was one thing that he can't wrap around his mind, so he pointed out that the god the lizard believes in is an insect god, so he doesn't get what does that have to do with thunder and lightning. And the lizard man just tilted his head. He didn't seem thrown off by the question though. It was more of a tilt that questioned why this man would be asking about such a thing. Still, he answered the man by a question, asking at what color is the lightning, which the man answered blue. The lizard man then pointed out that their deity is referred to as the blue insect god. That's why. But the human did not understand what the lizard man meant by that. So he just begun to think that lizard men are always convinced and swayed by the strangest things. They're so odd. This man didn't think being odd was necessarily a bad thing though. But he was convinced that he might be able to take advantage of the fact that they're odd. Hiding his innermost thoughts, the man introduced himself as we, and then asked the lizard man what his name was, which the lizard man was about to answer. But he noticed something from the distance. So he promptly apologized for cutting their conversation short, as he think there's some uninvited guests coming over. At far below, there was a group of armed gnolls walking through the valley. This hyena-like species had protruding snouts and black spots on their brown bodies. They had rough tempers and were obsessive over power structures. So they fought frequently amongst themselves. But the overall opinion of the players of the Lost World was that they were still worthy of consideration despite all these shortcomings. Their physical ability and intelligence were both high on average, so they were known to be a good species to have at the start of the game, regardless of what the player's small area was. But these facts about the game had no bearing on the lizard man and the man named Huey. The lizard man then asked Huey he thinks they are Salkite's men. Salkite was the tribal chief of the Gnoll tribe, also known as the Ear-Cut tribe, which were hostile towards the black-scaled lizard man. The black-scaled lizard man from the south and the Ear-Cut tribe from the northeast were the two largest tribes of the wilderness, so all the other smaller tribes had great interest in the two. Salkite and Rokrak believed in different gods. Therefore, it was inevitable for both tribal chiefs to be hostile towards each other. The man named Huey took great interest in whether the two tribes were going to fight, and if they did, Huey would win, excluding the human tribe of course. At least within this specific wilderness would be comparable to these two powerful tribes. But he decided to reply with a bit of sincerity, so the man took a closer look at the Gnoll group coming up the hill and came to a conclusion. He doesn't think they're Salkite's men, since it's strange that they would come to this area. If they were Salkite's men and part of the Ear-Cut tribe, Rokrak would definitely know of them coming this way, and they wouldn't be wandering around here so fearlessly. And he thinks that these group of gnolls is just used to be part of Salkite's tribe, but were driven out because of infighting. That kind of situation is common for gnolls, they might look armed. But if they look closely, it's clearly a sham. That one doesn't even have a knife, he's just holding a wooden club. Which the lizard man accepted Huey's explanation to be reasonable. But he thinks it's because they aren't cautious of their surroundings at all. If they were Salkite's scouting party, they would search the mountain ridge first, and wouldn't take that smooth path. They look tired and exhausted, so they are vagrants, and if they were a scouting party of the Ear-Cut tribe, they would actually be friendly. They would know that getting into such a trivial battle is meaningless. And both scouting parties would rather have a meal together, and try to get information from each other. In this context, the lizard man reached for an arrow. In doing so, he unveiled his true identity. It turned out he was Owen all along, and he was about to deliver the most electrifying greeting that the gnolls would die for. As Owen was about to use his bow, the man recognized it right away. It's the black-scaled lizardman's composite bow. The composite bow was made from the large water buffaloes that the black-scaled lizardman were raising, and it was one of the bows that could shoot the farthest out of all the other bows in the wilderness. The black-scaled lizard man only produced a specific number of the bows to arm each of their warriors, and they wouldn't ever trade them for